Steve Harvey had experienced everything in his 40-year career, until Lady Gaga decided to tell the truth. The Family Feud studio was buzzing with unprecedented energy that Tuesday afternoon in Los Angeles. This wasn't just another celebrity episode. This was Lady Gaga versus Kelly Clarkson's families. Two pop icons bringing their personal teams to battle it out for charity. The audience was electric, phones discreetly recording, hoping to capture viral moments for social media. Lady Gaga entered the studio like she always did, in full character. Today she was blonde, wearing an avant-garde silver outfit that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. Her makeup was flawless, her smile was radiant, and her energy was infectious. She was Lady Gaga, the global superstar, the woman who had conquered music, film, and fashion. Steve Harvey watched her work the crowd during rehearsal, signing autographs, taking selfies, being everything everyone expected her to be. But something felt different. In his 4 decades of entertainment, Steve had developed an instinct for reading people. And something about Gaga's performance felt forced. But what Steve Harvey didn't know was that behind that perfect smile, Lady Gaga was fighting the biggest battle of her life. The cameras started rolling. Kelly Clarkson's family took their positions on the left side of the stage, Kelly with her mother, sister, and 2 close friends she considered family. On the right side stood Lady Gaga's team, her actual sister Natalie, her longtime friend Sonja, her assistant Bobby, and her makeup artist Sarah, who had become like a mother to her. "Survey says," Steve called out with his trademark enthusiasm as the opening theme music blared. "Today we've got 2 incredible families. On this side we have Kelly Clarkson and her amazing family." The crowd erupted. Kelly waved enthusiastically, her genuine warmth radiating through the studio. "And on this side," Steve continued, "we have the one and only Lady Gaga and her chosen family." More cheers. Lady Gaga struck a pose, blew kisses to the audience, and played her role perfectly. But Steve noticed something in her eyes during that moment, a flicker of emptiness that didn't match the performance. The game began normally. Kelly and Gaga faced off at the podium for the first question. "Top 7 answers on the board," Steve announced. "We surveyed 100 people. Name something people do when they want to escape reality." Kelly buzzed in first. "Listen to music." "Listen to music," Steve called out, spinning toward the board. Ding! Number 1 answer. Kelly's team celebrated as she returned to her family. Lady Gaga stepped up to the podium, and Steve noticed her hands were shaking slightly. "What do you think, Gaga? Something people do when they want to escape reality?" For a moment, Lady Gaga just stared at the microphone. The studio fell silent, except for the low hum of the lights. Steve had asked thousands of questions over the years, but he'd never seen a contestant freeze like this. Gaga started, then stopped. Her perfectly crafted persona was beginning to crack. "I create characters." Steve raised an eyebrow. "Create characters?" "Create characters," Gaga repeated, her voice quieter now. "You know, like, become someone else entirely because being yourself is too..." She trailed off. The audience didn't know it yet, but they were about to witness the most vulnerable moment in television history. Steve looked at the board. "Create characters. Let's see if it's up there." "No ding, not on the board, sweetheart, but I understand what you mean." But something in Gaga's answer had shifted the energy in the room. Her team looked concerned. Even Kelly Clarkson was watching with obvious worry. The game continued, but Gaga's answers became increasingly personal and strange. When asked to name something people collect, she said identities. When asked for something that makes people feel safe, she answered pretending to be strong. During the commercial break, Steve approached Gaga at her family's podium. "You doing okay, baby girl?" That simple question, "baby girl," somehow broke through all of Lady Gaga's carefully constructed walls. Her lip began to tremble. "Steve," she whispered, so quietly that her own team couldn't hear. "Can I tell you something?" Steve glanced around the studio. The audience was chatting among themselves. The crew was adjusting equipment, and they had 3 minutes before cameras rolled again. Every professional contestant told him to keep things light, keep the show moving, maintain the celebrity mystique that made good television. Instead, Steve Harvey made a choice that would change both their lives forever. Talk to me, he said simply. What Lady Gaga said next would stop production for 20 minutes and leave Steve Harvey speechless for the first time in his career. I don't know who I am anymore, Gaga said, tears starting to form in her eyes. I've been Lady Gaga for so long that I forgot how to be Stefani. I wake up every morning and put on a mask, and I don't know how to take it off. Steve felt his heart skip. This wasn't about entertainment anymore. When I was little, Gaga continued, her voice breaking, I used to sit at the piano and just be me. I'd sing sad songs about my feelings, and it felt real, but now everything feels like a performance. Even when I'm alone, I don't know which version of me is real. The stage manager was signaling that they had 30 seconds before cameras rolled again, but Steve Harvey did something unprecedented. He held up his hand to the production booth and mouthed the words, "Not." "Keep talking, baby girl," Steve said softly. "Last week I was in my apartment in New York," Gaga said, tears now flowing freely, "and I looked in the mirror and I didn't recognize myself. Not because of the makeup or the clothes, but because I couldn't find Stefani anywhere. I've built this whole empire on being someone I created, and now I'm trapped inside it." The audience was starting to notice that something unusual was happening. The energy had shifted from celebration to concern. "I haven't had a real conversation with someone in months," Gaga continued. "Everyone treats me like Lady Gaga, even my team. They need me to be the character because that's how we all make a living. But I'm so tired, Steve. I'm exhausted from being perfect all the time." Steve Harvey was about to make a decision that would break every rule of television and save a superstar's life. Steve looked around the studio. Cameras were ready. The audience was waiting. Producers were getting anxious. He had a show to host, a schedule to maintain, a professional reputation to uphold. Instead, Steve Harvey did something that defied every expectation of celebrity television. "Stop the cameras," he announced loudly, his voice carrying across the studio with unmistakable authority. The studio fell completely silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to quiet down. "I said stop everything," Steve repeated, walking toward the center of the stage. The production assistant looked confused. The director in the booth was frantically speaking into his headset, but Steve Harvey's presence commanded the room, and gradually, all activity ceased. "Lady Gaga," Steve said, his voice now stripped of all performance, all entertainment value. This was just Steve Harvey, the man, talking to a young woman who was drowning in plain sight. "Come here, sweetheart." Gaga looked around nervously. 200 audience members were watching. Her team was staring. Kelly Clarkson had tears in her eyes. This was the exact opposite of everything Lady Gaga had been trained to do. Be vulnerable, be real, be human on camera. But something in Steve's voice made her walk toward him. What happened next wasn't scripted, wasn't planned, and would become the most watched moment in Family Feud history. When Gaga reached the center of the stage, Steve did something that shocked everyone, including himself. He gently reached up and removed the elaborate blonde wig she was wearing, revealing her natural brown hair underneath. "There she is," Steve said softly. Loud enough for the studio to hear, but gentle enough to feel intimate. "There's Stephanie." The audience gasped, audibly. Without the wig, without the dramatic makeup that was now smeared with tears, Lady Gaga looked incredibly young and vulnerable. "Stefani," Steve continued, using her real name with reverence, "you are not lost. You are right here. You've always been right here." Gaga, now Stefani, broke down completely. She buried her face in her hands and sobbed in a way that was raw and real and utterly human. Steve wrapped his arms around her in a fatherly hug that felt more genuine than any moment of television he'd ever created. "Listen to me, baby girl," Steve said, his own voice thick with emotion. "I've been in this business for 40 years. I've seen people lose themselves in fame, lose themselves in success, lose themselves in trying to be what everyone else needs them to be. But you know what I learned?" Stefani looked up at him, mascara running down her cheeks, looking nothing like the polished superstar who had walked onto the stage an hour earlier. "The bravest thing you can do is remember who you were before the world told you who you had to be." Steve Harvey was about to give Stefani something that would change her life forever, and it wasn't what anyone expected. Steve reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, worn notebook. It was leather-bound, clearly old, with pages that had been filled and refilled over decades. "This," Steve said, holding the notebook, "belonged to my father. He was a coal miner in West Virginia. He wasn't famous, he wasn't rich, he wasn't anybody that the world would remember, but he was the most authentic man I ever knew." Steve opened the notebook and Stefani could see handwritten words covering every page. Every night when he came home from the mines, covered in dust and exhausted beyond measure, he would sit at our kitchen table and write in this book. He wrote about his day, his feelings, his dreams, his fears. He wrote about who he was when nobody was watching. Steve closed the notebook and placed it in Stefani's hands. "He told me that as long as you know who you are when you're alone, you'll never lose yourself in what the world expects you to be. I want you to have this, not Lady Gaga, Stefani. I want you to write in it. Write about who you are when the cameras aren't rolling." The studio was completely silent. Even the crew members had stopped working to watch this moment unfold. "But Steve," Stefani whispered, "this belonged to your father. I can't take this." "Baby girl," Steve said, his voice full of warmth and certainty. "My father would have wanted someone who needed it to have it. And right now, you need it more than anyone." What Stefani did next would inspire millions and prove that authenticity is the most powerful performance of all. Stefani looked down at the notebook in her hands, then up at Steve, then out at the audience who had been watching this intimate moment unfold. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about how she looked, what image she was projecting, or what the internet would say. She was just being human. "Can I ask you all something?" Stefani said, her voice carrying clearly through the studio microphones. The audience leaned forward, hanging on every word. "How many of you have ever felt like you lost yourself, like you became so good at being what everyone needed that you forgot who you actually were?" Hands began rising throughout the audience. First a few, then dozens, then nearly everyone in the studio had their hand raised. "We all have," Stefani continued, her voice growing stronger with each word, "and I think that's why music exists. Not to escape who we are, but to remember who we are." She looked at Steve, then at Kelly Clarkson, who was crying openly now. "Steve, would it be okay if I played something? Not as Lady Gaga, but as Stefani?" Steve nodded, understanding immediately what she needed. The production team wheeled out a simple piano. Not the elaborate stage setup Lady Gaga was known for, but just a basic black piano. Stefani sat down at the bench, placed her hands on the keys, and began to play. The song that came next had never been performed before, and would become one of the most powerful moments in television history. What emerged from the piano was unlike anything Lady Gaga had ever recorded. It was simple, raw, and achingly beautiful. No backing tracks, no production, no elaborate arrangements, just Stefani and the piano and words that came from the deepest part of her soul. She sang about the little girl who used to play piano in her parents' house. She sang about the fear of losing herself in the glitter and the fame. She sang about the loneliness of being loved for a character instead of for who she really was. As she played, something magical happened in the studio. The artificial boundaries between performer and audience dissolved. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was communion. Kelly Clarkson walked over and sat beside Stefani on the piano bench, adding her voice in harmony. Not because it was planned or because it would look good on camera, but because the music called to her. Members of the audience began singing along, even though they'd never heard the song before. They were singing to the melody, to the emotion, to the universal truth of what it means to lose and find yourself. Steve Harvey stood watching, tears streaming down his face, knowing he was witnessing something that transcended television, transcended entertainment, transcended everything he thought he knew about human connection. When the song ended, the studio remained in complete silence for nearly a minute. It was the kind of silence that follows a profound spiritual experience. The aftermath of that day would change not just Stefani's life, but the lives of millions who saw what authentic courage looks like. The episode never aired as a traditional Family Feud episode. Instead, it became something unprecedented, a 45-minute special called When the Mask Falls Off, Stefani's Story. But the real transformation happened in the weeks and months that followed. Stefani began writing in her father's notebook every day. She wrote about her fears, her dreams, her authentic experiences without the filter of Lady Gaga's persona. She wrote about learning to be human again. 6 months later, she released an album unlike anything she'd ever created. It was called Stefani's Kitchen Table, a collection of songs written in her father's notebook, recorded simply with minimal production. It was the most critically acclaimed and commercially successful album of her career. More importantly, it inspired a movement. Millions of people began sharing their own stories of losing and finding themselves. The hashtag #AuthenticMe became a rallying cry for people tired of performing their lives instead of living them. Steve Harvey, meanwhile, made a decision that surprised everyone in his industry. He began ending every Family Feud episode the same way, by reminding contestants and audiences that their authentic selves were more valuable than any performance they could give. "Remember," he would say, looking directly into the camera, "the most powerful thing you can be is who you really are when nobody's watching." The notebook became a symbol. Stefani had it specially bound and created copies, donating them to mental health organizations for people struggling with identity and authenticity. But the most powerful part of this story happened 1 year later, when Stefani returned to Family Feud. 1 year after that transformative day, Stefani came back to the Family Feud studio. This time she arrived not as Lady Gaga, but as herself. Brown hair, minimal makeup, jeans, and a simple sweater. She looked radiant in a way that had nothing to do with costumes or performance. "How are you, baby girl?" Steve asked her during rehearsal. "I'm home," Stefani replied simply. "For the first time in years, I'm home in my own skin." The episode they filmed that day was joyful, funny, and completely authentic. Stefani laughed at herself, made silly jokes, and played the game without any agenda other than having fun. At the end of filming, she pulled Steve aside. "I need to tell you something," she said. "That day when you stopped everything and saw me, really saw me, you saved my life. I was planning to quit music, quit performing, quit everything. I didn't think there was any way back to myself." Steve smiled, the same warm smile that had comforted her a year earlier. "You saved yourself, baby girl. I just reminded you that you were worth saving." Stefani reached into her purse and pulled out the notebook, now filled with a year's worth of authentic thoughts, fears, dreams, and discoveries. "I want to give this back to you," she said. "No," Steve replied firmly. "That's yours now. But I want you to promise me something. Anything. When you meet someone who's lost themselves the way you were lost, you do what I did. You stop everything, and you see them. Really see them." Stefani nodded, tears in her eyes again, but this time they were tears of gratitude, not desperation. Today, Stefani Germanotta continues to perform as Lady Gaga, but everything is different now. The characters she creates come from a place of choice rather than necessity. She performs with joy instead of desperation. And most importantly, when the show ends and the costumes come off, she knows exactly who she is. She keeps her father's notebook on her piano at home, and every night before bed she writes a few lines about her authentic experiences of the day. The last entry reads simply, "Today I remembered that being human is the most beautiful performance of all." Steve Harvey changed Family Feud that day, but more importantly, he changed the understanding of what it means to see someone, really see them. In a world of constant performance and social media masks, Stefani's breakdown and breakthrough reminds us that the most courageous thing any of us can do is have the strength to be vulnerable, the wisdom to ask for help, and the grace to remember that our authentic selves are enough. The notebook sits on Stefani's piano today, a reminder that sometimes the most important conversations happen when someone cares enough to stop everything and say, "I see you, the real you, and you are enough." That day, television stopped being entertainment and became ministry. Steve Harvey stopped being a host and became a healer, and Lady Gaga stopped being a character and became human again. Sometimes the most powerful performance is when you stop performing altogether.